Hello, hello, hello. My name is Deepak, and I'm your host today for Pixel Pushers. In the ever changing world of UGC, we wanted to be a podcast, a show that really highlighted the creators that are making this space alive and creative. So today we have Zero to Your Hero on the show. Is happy to share his experience, and we're going to go into play some other UGC games, Duck Duck Doom on Horizon. So right now, I want to introduce my co-host Elliot. Take it away.
Hey guys, I'm Elliot. I'm a creative director and producer for the Meta Horizon social channels, and I'm very happy to be here and talk to ZeroYaHero and hear about his experiences with Fortnite and some other UGC spaces that he's involved in. And yeah, he is very successful in Fortnite, and he's made significant strides in the UGC space. And we're just excited to hear from his experiences. And so, without further ado, ZeroYaHero.
Hello, hello. Thank you guys for having me.
Thank you for coming.
Um, I'm ZeroYaHero. I've been primarily in the Fortnite UGC ecosystem where I met Deepak. And I was there before they had Unreal Editor for Fortnite, where you could essentially use the creative tool set within your console, your Switch, mobile, etc. And I had the privilege to be featured by Epic Games when in one of their first LTMs, limited time modes, featured on the front page, and that was a really awesome experience. Continued to build my skills for a few years there, slipped in and out for education experiences with high school and now university. Had a brief experience at an Activision office nearby to experience AAA development, but I've started to creep myself back in with contract work, primarily with Unreal Editor for Fortnite, with their verse language, basically scripting and whatnot. I call myself probably a tech artist working with very successful creators in the space. But yeah, I'm kind of just exploring any opportunity, primarily in game development. But yeah, UGC is the current medium that I'm working with.
Zero, what I love about you is, and it's going to sound crazy for me, is like in my mind, you're like one of the prototypes of human beings for UGC because you've gone through, so people don't know this, right? Like through so many transitions that I think are natural in UGC, right? You were starting as a player, you became a creator. You started with tools that had a lot of potential with Fortnite Creative and became more powerful with UEFN. We're going through that same transition where we had like a VR builder tools, not removing it, but adding to it, right, with the desktop editor. So like you go through this phase that I see a lot of UGC ecosystems go through. So like I love from your perspective, like what drew you into this space in the first place?
Yeah, so I think what you talked about being a player and then a creator first, I think that's pretty much it's a requirement, I think, for UGC spaces. If you can't be a player first, I think it's a lot harder to be a creator or a successful creator, I will say. If you don't know what's fun and you don't know what's successful on the platform, it's hard to become a creator. But yeah, what drew me was really with Fortnite, you have the kind of similar terminology, the prototype of Fortnite gameplay, which people are familiar with, which Epic Games developed, with their building and their combat, etc. And so it's really easy to become a creator because Epic was essentially like, okay, you like our game, you can modify some rules. And as a player, you might enjoy some aspects, but you might want to emphasize others, or you might want to remove some things that you think restrict your gameplay. So yeah, I think that's with those transitions and whatnot. I think being a player first, you want to change some rules of the game, you start becoming a creator. And then if the tools progress and they evolve, you start to dive deeper into the game development rabbit hole and you want to change so many rules that it's not even the same game anymore. But yeah.
With so many different creators building on UEFN, I mean, what are some strategies that you use to make your games stand out amongst the dynamic environment?
That's a good question. Well, one of the big things that's for all UGC platforms, I think, is the onboarding process. You know, you have like your thumbnail, your trailer. That's a big challenge of trying to stand out in that kind of battlefield of, okay, I need my thumbnail to, with all UGC, I think in general, because they all have this discover page, this way to find content. You're battling with trying to make your experience familiar enough so people aren't so like taken aback, but also different enough so that you stand out compared to the competition. And so the ways that I've kind of employed, you know, knowing that to try to stand out is, first of all, just always being aware of what your competitors are doing. For a project I've been working on recently with someone else, is we daily will look up titles that are similar to ours and see the thumbnails that are kind of showing up in the trailers, because it's the first thing players see. And just very recently, we completely changed our thumbnail to look nothing like the others because we were noticing that it seemed too similar to other ones. Empowering analytics that are given are also very important. Like, for example, for the thumbnails, we have like the click-through rate and impressions. We're always trying to see what's working and what's not working. But yeah, I always try to do something different personally. There's some people in the ecosystem who try to do just the same thing, but a little bit better. I have not always been a huge fan of that. I think you kind of have to do something a little different because, I don't know, I think I like to try to do something different because if this experience isn't a success for the players, at least I learn a lot making it.
I like that where, you know, the beauty of UGC is like it's accessible to a lot more people. The hard part we don't talk about is because it's so accessible to other people, you have to find ways to stand out artistically through the thumbnail. But what's fascinating always me about these journeys is you have to do all that and then you got to find a way to sort of make a living. One thing I want to know for our audience is like, while you're trying to stand out, how do you also try to find ways to like earn monetization, right? Earn money, right? And maybe tie in your story because a lot of people don't know is like with supervision, parent supervision, right? We work together with your mom, right? And now you transition to college and that type of stuff. Like maybe tie in your story of how you even look at it differently from when you were younger to now you're like on your own.
Yeah. Well, so at the time where we were working together, and of course the lifetime of just the Fortnite UGC space it was very early on. Epic, it's very obvious they're much more careful about what they were featuring because they wanted to make sure that it was worth the investment. And they obviously had their main modes that they knew most players wanted to pay attention to. So whenever they wanted to feature something, it was very clear they wanted to keep it limited until they've upscaled to what is now Discover, which is like, you can find thousands of games very easily. So at that time, a feature would mean you get a lot of eyes on it. So the monetization was less competitive in that sense. It was competitive to get the feature, but when you were featured, when you were on that page, the monetization was much more focused and whatnot, but it was in focused increments. As soon as you were taken off that, you might not. Obviously, it's harder for players to play that game with a group of players because at the time they didn't have matchmaking like they do now. You couldn't just, like for Horizon Worlds on the website, you can just click go. They didn't have that. You had to matchmake with 16 players and then input the code and then jump into the island. So that was a very different experience. Today, obviously, it's much more competitive with finding those creations. So that means you might not get paid as much because you're not getting as many players. So really the battle is with promotion now, which is, I think, a good thing. I think you shouldn't be relying too much on the provider of the platform on getting promoted. That's kind of game development. Part of game development is promoting your game and trying to convince people why it's fun. But so that's a big way of making sure you get paid is if you're pushing those promotion channels, if you're working on marketing and whatnot, you will kind of see that come to fruition. But for me, I do a lot of contract work. Like I said, that's been the most reliable source of income for me because I have a lot of connections to creators that are higher up in the ecosystem on the food chain or whatnot. And not just because I was there early. I've definitely done a lot of work to develop my skills. I'm confident in saying that I know a lot about Verse compared to a lot of other people, or just the tool set in general, because I've had the privilege of time too. But yeah.
As a contractor in Fortnite, would you say that it's all word of mouth for like the people who get hired the most? Is that kind of like you just have a reputation in the community and they call you?
Kind of, yeah. A lot of the community is on Twitter, and the best way I get it is kind of word of mouth in the sense that sometimes you'll do work for one creator and they might suggest you or recommend you to another. But I do a lot of my own pushing out by I will tweet out something of something I did recently for another creator for myself that I know people would be interested in, to try and showcase my skills and what I can do. And that's gotten me a lot of jobs. But yeah, it depends.
What are some of the coolest opportunities that you've gotten in terms of monetization through Fortnite?
Like through contracting or just through in general?
How about just any way you make money
Okay, yeah,
inside of
fair.
Fortnite?
I would say contracting is more exciting to me because there's a guaranteed amount out of it. I definitely have excitement for creating my own experiences. Like I've had a few passion projects that were a lot of fun because I get to invest my energy into learning about something I want to do. Like for example, I had a project called Stormbox, which was all about procedural generation and uses techniques similar to how Minecraft generates its worlds in my own world. And I thought that was really fun to explore. But with contracting, even though I call it contracting, there's not always a strict contract. One thing that I am not a huge fan of the UGC space is that because everyone's so independent, you're not always given a paper to sign and like strict guidelines. There's a big trust kind of level involved, but I'm very careful about who I work with. For most exciting experiences, I think really I worked with good gamers for a little bit, but it was kind of hard with my school schedule. They're the people that do Go Goated, Zone Wars, Murder Mystery. They're very popular in the Fortnite ecosystem. They do Bed Wars as well, but probably I have a closer acquaintance, Deepak, you might remember them, Raider 464, really close with him. And in a good way, he's very loyal to me in that he'll come to me first, usually for opportunities to work. And we're working on some really big stuff right now. And yeah, recently I just did like a little, I would say a very good example of tech art where something that could modify the player's health, but was animated. And I don't really know how to explain it without showing it, but it was really fun.
Yeah, that's like, this is now with like my fourth metaverse I'm at. And I think one thing people don't often understand is how social like UGC platforms are. Like I work on an Unreal game, right? And it's more of our studio solo endeavor, right? But in the UGC space, it's like you're making friendships. Your friendships get hurt, right? You have a friend DA.
Yeah.
Uh, sometimes they betray the friend DA, right? It's all these like that's a common misconception. Like it's a social ecosystem, and it grows because it's social.
Mm-hmm.
So I think that's like a common misconception. But like I think there's like another misconception one maybe you could also like tease out for us is around monetization. Like what do you think is the most misconceptions you think around monetization in UGC platforms? Like you talked a little bit of it, the friendier, right? When you're trusting other creators, if you don't do a contract between you two, what are some other things you feel like people don't really know from your
Well,
point of view?
yeah. Well, one thing with Fortnite is that I'm not going to bash Fortnite, but one thing they've done to improve was originally they weren't transparent about what people were getting paid, and I was kind of against that. I think because there was a lot of people that were doing things and it felt like they were benefiting because they knew people didn't know what they were getting paid with. Um, but so I think one of the common misconceptions is that you can get paid a lot of money, but the misconception around that is that if you have a lot of players, a lot of people, a lot of eyes on your game, it kind of makes sense. If you look at a Steam game that has 20,000 concurrent players, that's a huge success in a lot of cases. If you have that many concurrent players on Fortnite or Roblox, why is it not treated the same? It should also be, rewarded economically or financially for that. But yeah, I think the other half to that is that if you're getting 100 players or 50 players, depending on the monetization model, that really isn't enough to sustain, it maybe can just sustain development, but it can't sustain like life. So I don't know. It can be a misconception that you can, or in my case, I've had a lot of like people experiencing my creations, but that doesn't mean I'm a zillionaire or anything like that, because it's all flowing. All games die and live and thrive again. So it's not concrete. It's not constant.
That's super interesting. So, what advice would you give someone who is looking to enter the UGC space and is interested in monetizing their creations? I asked you for 3. You could just give me 1 if you have that.
I think I actually do have 3. So, and they actually came to me pretty quick because it's natural. I don't know. But the first one I kind of wanted to bring up ever since we kind of got this organized and scheduled was Deepak. One of the most wisest words I thought he ever said for UGC was no promises. He always said that multiple times, and it really stuck with me, was that whenever anyone comes to you with an opportunity, especially the people that manage the platform, don't grip onto it too hard and expect it, because as soon as you do that, that's when you start having these meltdowns and freaking out, which I think a lot of creators unfortunately become a victim to. Is they'll think it's a promise, they'll hold on to it too long, and then they'll feel like everything's failing them. But if you kind of realize it's not a promise, it's definitely not a contract, then you're able to navigate the ecosystem a little bit better. Because if this thing's not a promise, then you might want to explore this thing over here in the meantime, instead of just waiting around here for something to happen. The second thing I'd probably say is schooling. I think this is just something you should really think about a lot if you're entering the UGC space. I think it depends on the tool set, but game development majors and things I've found to be, I wouldn't say a waste of time, but they're really dependent on the set of tools that you use. I think it's maybe better to invest your time in those things on your own, and maybe go for a degree that is more applicable to different careers. Like, for example, computer science, one of like a course you might take is technical writing, which is really what a lot of documentation is for any software tools, which is a game engine, which is game development software tools. So understanding more core concepts will help you be a UGC creator. I wouldn't go to school for something super specific though. And then I guess the last thing is kind of like the balance between like passion and sustainability. I've definitely seen both sides of this, where I've put a lot of effort into something that's I'm very passionate about, because it's something I would want to play, something I would want to experience, but then it doesn't really form out to what I want it to be. So just knowing that a passion project is a passion project for yourself and not putting expectations on it. And then there's the other side of sustainability, where if you have a project that's earning you income, earning you attention, but you're not really passionate about it, you should probably put some effort into sustaining it, even if you don't want to, because there are no promises, again, circling back in this space. So you might as well make it worthwhile. But yeah, that's probably my 3 right there.
You know what's so funny? I always have those phrases, right? Because like my deepest fear, this gets really personal, like, is people thinking like I'm lying to them on purpose.
Mm-hmm.
When the intention is, and I think this happens in entertainment, Elliot, all the time, is like you're trying to work out a project, passion project or deal, right? So you're going to the people like you love, you want to create with, right? And so you come in with that enthusiasm, right? But you know that they're like at any minute anything can fall through, right? Funding, algorithm change, project change, personnel change, right? So it's always this like, that's what I don't think people understand about entertainment business. What makes it so hard? And there's people who are sharks, don't get me wrong. And the people, maybe bad at their job, right? And then there's people like Ernest, but you're on like shifting sands. You don't want them not to know. So it's always that like combination of like the if you ever read stories on like how games or movies are made, that's to me the most fascinating part about reading it. Like how like people like Miracle is like a successful game. I think the miracle is like you made a game. And that's what I always no promises come from that sort of like philosophy. It's like, hey, want to talk to you. Here's what's happening. As soon as I know otherwise, I'll let you know. But that's so funny that you picked up on that.
Yeah, it was definitely one of the most important things, I think. And one of the only reasons I've survived in the ecosystem is knowing that there's no promises, because otherwise, well, I don't know. You need to know when to jump ship. You need to know when to move on to something else.
That's the truth. All right, we're gonna switch gears here. Now we're getting into the game. We're gonna play Duck Duck Doom with ZeroYaHero, but we're still gonna be talking monetization throughout. Let's get into it.
Hey,
Oh gosh, where's this duck? Oh my goodness. Does he get faster?
so for
God,
those that know, this is one of the creators made it during the mobile competition. It got
uh,
one of
Right.
the awards. Oh, crap. Uh, so Zero, as we're getting chased by a duck. Uh, when you're making experiences, right? How do you go about adding monetization into your games, or do you even think about it?
um, well, in the Fortnite ecosystem, for example, they don't have monetization that we can necessarily control. Like we can't sell people anything either for. Oh, I think I died there. Or no, the game ended. Um, you can't you can't offer anything to players for a virtual currency or a real currency. They have engagement based payout, so it's basically how long players play the game for. Basically, kind of dividing up Fortnite's earnings that way. So in a way, it kind of rewards good gameplay, ideally, where if your game is fun enough, people will play long enough. So really, I just empower the analytics that they give us. I see the average play time. I see when players are leaving, and I try to make changes in the gameplay to keep players on.
Do you not find that hard though, when it's just based on engagement?
Do I find it hard
Yeah.
to like balance that? Yeah, definitely. Because even if I do a lot of work to keep players on, obviously the other creations are doing the same thing. They're trying to lure the players in. So even if my game is perfect, players might want to play something different. So they'll leave. It's definitely very hard. But I think, most UGC marketplaces like Roblox, for example, they have ways you can have the players purchase something with a virtual currency, which I think is something that is probably going to happen to most UGC places like Fortnite eventually. Um, I definitely think it's probably a little bit easier to manage, calculate how much you can earn with those types of systems. But I
You mean
work
like
with what I got.
Roblox essentially?
Yeah, yeah.
That totally tracks. Um, but I like what you said earlier, where you know not all UGC games, but a lot have a life cycle.
Yeah,
So you have to always be thinking of your next game that
yeah,
you need to put out, and you're like weighing the pros and cons of like how deep you go gameplay wise to ship out your next game. Maybe you can talk to that kind of process for yourself.
Yeah, that's a big thing. Like, you definitely made me think about that right now. Is that there's kind of two strategies that people go for. One is you kind of give up on a game preemptively. Like, even if your game is seeing success, you kind of early exit to work on your next thing, because oftentimes games don't have long lifetimes. A lot of it's based on trends. It's short form content sometimes. So what creators will do, sometimes they'll make a quick game, they'll early exit, they won't update it anymore, they'll work on the next thing. They won't make as much money as some creators do, but they'll make like a lump amount and then they'll move on. But then there's the other strategy of you work really hard on one project and try to have it be like a persistent project where you constantly update that. The latter one being much harder to do. But I would say it takes sometimes it takes more skill, a lot more fine tuning, a lot more careful research and whatnot. So I think it depends on what your patience level is.
What's a good metric in Roblox, or I'm sorry, in Fortnite, to let you know if it's a successful experience or not?
If it's going to be a successful experience,
Yeah.
honestly, I would probably say if you get an hour of a good tab placement on their Discover, basically their Explore page, you have a good metric of success then, because even if they remove that tab placement, they basically remove you off like a feature page or whatnot. You'll still have players who favorite the creation and then they'll come back to it later. That is if it's, a good creation, then you'll have good retention for it. So there's that. And then there's the conversion rate through like content that you might promote with like short form content on YouTube, Instagram, or TikTok. If you see like you're getting a lot of views and then also a lot of people are also jumping into the game from your video and not from features given by the platform provider, that's usually a good indicator that you have something unique and that players actually want to play it.
How do they decide? How they decide who gets like featured on the page?
Well, they have epic picks, which is like employees actually pick it based off, I don't know, personal preference and whatnot. But then they have their algorithmic stuff, which they just recently, I wouldn't say open source, but they just exposed a lot of the metrics that they really care about.
Cool.
So I think that's a good thing that I think most UGC platforms should do, because it allows you to employ, this is what I need to do to make my game succeed. Some people's counter argument would be like, then it's easier to game the system. Well, if it's publicly available, then isn't it easier to expose what to game, and then it's easier for the platform provider to fix that as well? So I don't know. I think it's a good thing overall. Being able to calculate those things yourself is a great thing.
Sure.
Yeah, I understand the counterpoint there, but that argument, right, assumes that no one is already gaming it because they figured it out on their own.
Right. That's why I think it's better to make it public, because it's that way technically everyone could game it, and if everyone's gaming it, then it's all competitive and the best comes out on top or whatever. You're on an equal playing field.
Right. I guess the only thing I ever worry about for me personally is there are experiences that I love and play that aren't ever maximized for profits, if that makes sense. So me personally would hate losing those games. To be fair,
Yeah.
that's not to say they can't make those games, but those creators.
I see what you're talking about. You're talking about the games that are more like, they're not programmed to be commercial success. They're more like for a specific group of people. And I do think that's a tough spot. Those games I feel like do struggle a lot in UGC spaces, which is a shame. Usually those games benefit, I think, from those featuring from like for example, Epic Games. But even then, if it's not supposed to be a commercial success, you might not get everyone playing it. You might not get the payout. A lot of those types of experiences you're talking about, people did in brand experiences. So like, company would hire them for kind of advertisement or something like that. That's usually when you'd have those unique game modes come out. But yeah, you're right. It does, because they don't get as much attention. It does feel like they struggle a lot more. It's definitely different compared to like Steam or the App Store, where if you have a unique experience, you just make it $5 or something, and people who actually want to play the game will put up the money up front, and then that way the creator actually gets paid for what they've made.
Yeah, I like that. Well, I'll actually ask you at the end, right? Like, what's the future of UGC? So, like, one of my fantasy thoughts, I'll call it, right, is all platforms get better at personalization. Because, I work on an indie game, right, on Unreal.
Huh?
And I have friends, right, work on Quest indie games, et cetera, right? So, with a personalization algorithm where you're going after people, identifying people that opt in, they might be into these types of games. And then I think there's opportunities for those creators to find an audience. Because to me, that's the other half of monetization is how do we help creators? Which I know you said earlier, like it's on the creator, which it is. At the end of the day, it is to find an audience. I still am optimistic. Maybe my own code platforms should try to help creators find an audience.
Yeah,
as well.
For sure. I mean, I think it's interesting is that at least I don't play Roblox in my free time, but I definitely did earlier on, and I definitely remember the Discover Explore page not being so personalized. But I know nowadays that's completely different. Like, everything is so personalized now with what they can do with algorithms and machine learning to know what a player would like, and I think that should ideally benefit creators in making what they want. But I mean, ultimately, there's a fine line of like, there's a hard truth of maybe your game is not perfect. It's not great, and you got to move on to the next thing. Not every game can be amazing and be a success. But yeah,
I know that's not, even though I've said that lesson, it's still always hard to hear.
Yeah, for sure. I think it's the hardest thing to hear, and I've definitely had to tell myself that too. Like, as much as something seems so perfectly crafted and a perfect combination of things that people like, it might not be what people want.
This is our last round. So make
Sounds
it count.
good.
Why is it the last round, Elliot? Because you've won so many times?
Maybe.
Hey, I won finally.
That's awesome.
That's GG.
All right, hold
I
on.
like the sunflower
Working.
hat.
Yeah.
All right, so we can exit out of this?
Yeah, we can exit out. That was fun. I like this new format, Deepak, of this
What's that?
gameplay. I like the new format of the gameplay that we've been doing. It's good.
Zero, thank you for playing so much with us. Duck, duck, boom. A question I always like to end with all our guests, especially creators like you. What do you see as the future of UGC in 10, 20 years?
Well, it's definitely a big question because I feel like you're always hearing a lot about it, especially people who are at the top of these platforms, like the CEOs. They always have these grand visions of what it should be and whatnot. For me, I think UGC will probably and not in a bad way, always be kind of a stepping stone into greater game development. I think accessibility is the benefit of UGCs, the fact that it's convenient and anyone can really access it. But ultimately, the bigger you get, the more you dive deep into the rabbit hole of game development, the more you're like, I really want to change this. And certain tools, if you want to keep them accessible, you want to keep them convenient and performant, you can't allow a certain level of customization. I mean, you can certainly try, but I think ultimately, once you get to a certain point, you want to be able to choose what platform your game shows on and what tools you use to create them, which is what I would say indie developers, AAA developers choose. They write their own engines from the ground up. So I think UGC can definitely make leaps. I definitely think in the future that there will be much more players playing UGC games, and we'll definitely see companies that build and grow from that. But I don't necessarily see AAA studios going backwards into their own platforms or to some other platforms to develop. But yeah, I think there still will just be a different type of food chain or path to game development, where UGC I think is going to be where you see a lot of people start first. I mean, it's happening. I mean, I think it was different a little, like maybe 10 years ago, where people were doing the same thing just with website games, but now it's just through Roblox or something instead, because it's much more convenient. And those do great jobs of teaching you the basics. And oftentimes much more than the basics. Those tools have evolved so much. So yeah, that's kind of where I think things are headed. It's definitely with AI mixed in there, it gets a lot crazier, I think. But yeah, I think great things. I think it's heading in the right direction, and I'm glad it's still accessible and people are investing more time in the platforms.
I love that. I don't think I've heard it described as a food chain, like different food chain. I agree with you. It's gaming is not going anywhere. Social experience aren't going anywhere, but how people consume is going to continue to evolve. So I love that. Well, Zero, please don't be a stranger. Thank you for being on the show. Elliot,
Thank you for having me.
Yeah, of course. Elliot, want to close this out?
Yeah. Thank you so much for hanging out with Pixel Pushers today. And feel free to like and subscribe anywhere you can see it, over there, over here, or under there. I'm not sure where it's going to end up. But thank you so much. And hey, we'll see you next time. Peace.
Bye, everyone.